Have you ever spent hours studying only to realize later that you've forgotten most of what you've learned? It's frustrating, right? In fact, research shows that 70% of what you study is lost in just a few days. Why does this happen? What are you missing in your study routine? The answer lies in how we learn, process, and retain information, and it might surprise you. Here's what you need to know. We all know the feeling. You spend hours preparing for an exam or learning something new, yet days later, most of it slips from your memory. The reason this happens is because traditional study methods are ineffective in promoting long-term retention. Despite spending time reading, listening, or watching educational content, the information often doesn't stick. This phenomenon isn't random. It's a result of how our brains process and retain knowledge. The learning pyramid developed by the NTL Institute in the 1960s explains this. According to the pyramid, learners retain only 10% of what they read, 20% of what they watch, and 5% of what they hear in lectures. At the same time, retention rates are significantly higher when you engage more actively with the material. For example, when you teach someone else, you retain up to 90% of what you've learned. This dramatic difference in retention happens because active engagement forces the brain to make connections and correct mistakes, which is essential for learning. When you read a textbook or listen to a lecture, your brain processes the information passively. Although it's still processing, it doesn't have to engage deeply. If you're just reading or watching, you're not actively applying the information. As a result, much of what you encounter gets lost because your brain has no way to properly encode the data for future use. Passive learning doesn't challenge your memory or require deep cognitive involvement. It simply inputs information without much connection to your existing knowledge. However, the brain functions differently when it's actively engaged. For example, when you try to teach someone else what you've learned, you are forced to organize the information in your mind. This process helps to reinforce your understanding and ensures the material sticks. If you make a mistake in the process, you actively correct it, which strengthens the neural pathways associated with the new knowledge. This is why teaching or applying knowledge is one of the most powerful ways to retain information. Practice also has a similar effect. When you practice what you've learned, your brain goes through a trial and error process, identifying gaps in your understanding and allowing you to improve over time. Practicing helps create stronger neural pathways by forcing your brain to recall and apply what you've learned repeatedly. Unlike passive methods, practice and teaching challenge your brain to solve problems, making the learning more memorable and lasting. But why do we forget so much of what we study even after we've made an effort to understand? A key reason lies in how our brains handle new information. Our brains often get stuck on new concepts or ideas. When you encounter something unfamiliar, your brain struggles to make sense of it. If the explanation isn't immediately clear, your brain may stop processing it or may misunderstand key points. This is why rereading the same material often results in spotting new details after multiple attempts. It's not because you didn't read it carefully the first time, it's because your brain simply couldn't process everything at once. You miss key details, which makes it harder to retain what you studied. This challenge is further complicated by the fact that we tend to interpret information based on our own existing knowledge. When we read or listen to something new, we often misunderstand or misinterpret details. You might think you understand a concept perfectly, but in reality, your brain has only absorbed part of it. Only by applying the concept and making mistakes do you fully understand where your interpretation was incorrect and why. This active involvement, learning by doing, is the key to ensuring that the information sticks. To avoid wasting time on ineffective study techniques, it's important to recognize that simply reading or watching isn't enough. Instead, actively engaging with the material is essential for better retention. You should incorporate teaching, discussions, and hands-on practice into your learning routine. Use tools like mind maps, create summaries, or even try to explain concepts to a friend or family member. The more you apply the material in different ways, the better you will retain it. If you found this information helpful, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more insights on how to learn smarter, not harder.